morning sun shone brightly through the glass windows of Tech Vision Industries. The building stood tall in the heart of the city, with its modern design and shiny steel exterior. People in business suits walked in and out of the revolving doors, each one looking important and busy. A taxi pulled up to the front entrance. The back door opened and a man stepped out onto the sidewalk. He was in his late 50s, with gray hair neatly trimmed and kind eyes that had seen many years of life. He wore a dark blue suit that was clean and pressed, though the style was from a few years back. In his hand he carried a worn leather briefcase that had traveled with him through countless meetings and lectures. He looked up at the building and took a deep breath. He had been invited here for a special meeting about a mentorship program. His years of experience in teaching and guiding young people made him the perfect person for this consultation. He had received the email 3 weeks ago, and he had prepared thoroughly for this visit. The man walked through the revolving doors and into the bright lobby. The floor was made of polished marble that reflected the lights above. A large desk sat in the center where a young woman with blonde hair sat typing on her computer. Behind her, the company logo glowed in blue letters on the white wall. He approached the desk with a gentle smile. "Good morning," he said politely. "I have a meeting scheduled for 10 o'clock. The receptionist looked up from her screen. She glanced at him quickly, then back at her computer. "Name?" she asked without much interest. He told her his name clearly. She typed something and frowned at her screen. "What position are you applying for?" she asked. "I'm not applying for a position," he explained patiently. "I'm here as a consultant. I was invited to discuss the new mentorship program." The receptionist's eyebrows raised slightly, but she clicked her mouse a few times. "Conference room 3, she said, pointing down a hallway. "Second door on the left. Someone will be with you shortly." He thanked her and walked down the hallway. His shoes made soft sounds on the hard floor. He found the conference room easily. It was a medium-sized room with a long wooden table in the center. 12 black leather chairs surrounded the table. One wall was entirely made of glass, showing a view of the city below. On another wall hung several awards and certificates. The man chose a seat in the middle of the table and placed his briefcase beside him. He looked around the room, noticing the expensive decorations and modern technology. A large screen hung on one wall ready for presentations. The room smelled of coffee and cleaning products. He waited calmly, checking his watch occasionally. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. He didn't mind waiting. He had learned patience over his many years of teaching. Finally, the door opened. 2 people walked in, talking and laughing with each other. One was a woman in her late 20s. She had red hair pulled back in a tight ponytail and wore a gray suit with very high heels. The other was a man, probably around 30 years old, with styled brown hair and a confident walk. He wore an expensive-looking watch that caught the light. Both of them stopped talking when they saw him sitting there. They looked at each other with surprised expressions. The woman, whose name was Amanda, spoke first. "Oh," she said, her voice showing confusion. "Can we help you?" The man stood up politely. "Good morning. I'm here for the 10 o'clock meeting about the mentorship program consultation." Brett, the male recruiter, looked him up and down slowly. A small smile appeared on his face. "The mentorship program?" He repeated, his tone suggesting he didn't believe it. "Yes," the older man confirmed. "I received an email invitation 3 weeks ago from your HR department." Amanda and Brett exchanged a look. Amanda's smile grew wider, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile people make when they find something amusing. "I think there might be some confusion," Amanda said, walking to the other side of the table. She didn't sit down. Instead, she stood with her arms crossed. "The maintenance office is on the ground floor. You might have better luck there." The older man's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes showed he understood what was happening. "I'm not here for a maintenance position," he said calmly. "As I mentioned, I'm here as a consultant." Brett laughed, a short sound that filled the quiet room. "A consultant?" he said, leaning against the wall. "Look, buddy, I don't know who told you what, but this is a serious tech company. We don't just have random people walking in claiming to be consultants. I have the email on my phone if you'd like to see it," the man offered, reaching into his pocket. Amanda held up her hand. "That won't be necessary," she said quickly. "Listen, mistakes happen. Maybe someone gave you the wrong information. But this meeting is for actual professional consultants with proper credentials and experience in the tech industry." The older man remained standing, his posture straight and dignified. "I have over 30 years of experience in education and technology development," he said quietly. "I've taught at several universities and have worked with numerous companies on their training programs." Brett pushed himself off the wall and walked closer to the table. 30 years? He said with mock interest. "Really? And where exactly did you get all this experience?" "I taught at MIT for 15 years, the man answered. "Before that, I worked at several other institutions." Amanda let out a small laugh that she tried to hide behind her hand. "MIT," she said. "That's a good one." The older man felt something tighten in his chest, but he kept his face calm. He had faced this kind of treatment before in his life. It never got easier, but he had learned how to handle it with grace. "I understand you may have doubts," he said evenly. "Perhaps we could call your HR department to confirm my appointment." Brett sat down in a chair at the head of the table, leaning back as if he owned the place. "Here's the thing," he said, his voice taking on a tone like he was explaining something to a child. "This company has very high standards. We can't just let anyone walk in here and claim they're supposed to be in meetings with our executives." "I'm not claiming anything," the man replied. "I was invited here." Amanda walked around the table, her heels clicking on the floor. She stopped a few feet away from him, looking at his suit with obvious judgment in her eyes. "That suit," she said, tilting her head. "When did you buy it?" "The 90s?" The older man glanced down at his suit. It was true that it wasn't the latest style, but it was clean and appropriate. "I believe we should focus on the purpose of this meeting," he said, trying to steer the conversation back to professional ground. Brett stood up again, unable to sit still in his amusement. "You know what I think?" he said, looking at Amanda. "I think someone is pulling a prank. Or maybe this is one of those situations where someone got confused about which building they're supposed to be in." The man took a slow breath. His hands, resting at his sides, remained steady even though he felt disrespected. He had worked too hard in his life, overcome too many obstacles to let two young people shake his confidence. But he also recognized that this situation was going nowhere good. Amanda pulled out her phone from her pocket. The screen lit up as she unlocked it with her finger. She made a show of scrolling through something, her face serious like she was doing important work. But the older man could see the slight smile at the corner of her mouth. "Let me just check our system," she said, tapping on her screen with her long fingernails. "What did you say your name was again?" He repeated his name clearly, spelling out his last name to make sure there was no confusion. He watched as she pretended to type it in. Her eyes moved across the screen and then she looked up with exaggerated surprise. That's strange," Amanda said, glancing at Brett. "I'm not seeing anything here. No appointment, no consultation request, nothing at all." Brett walked over to look at her phone, even though they both knew he couldn't see her screen from that angle. "Nothing?" he asked, playing along with her act. "That's very weird. Are you sure you have the right company, sir?" The older man felt his patience being tested, but he maintained his calm exterior. "I'm certain," he said firmly. The email came from someone named Patricia Chen in your Human Resources Department. She specifically mentioned this date and time. Amanda's eyebrows went up dramatically. "Patricia Chen?" she repeated. "Well, Patricia is actually on vacation this week. She's been gone for 10 days now, so I'm not sure how she could have sent you an email recently." This was a lie, and the older man suspected it, but he had no way to prove it standing in that conference room. He reached for his briefcase. "I can show you the email right now," he offered. "That's okay," Brett said quickly, waving his hand dismissively. "Even if you have an email, it's clearly some kind of mix-up. This happens sometimes. People get confused about dates or locations." Amanda put her phone back in her pocket. She walked to the window and looked out at the view, then turned back to face him. "Can I ask you something?" she said, her voice taking on a false sweetness. "What exactly makes you think you're qualified to consult for a cutting-edge technology company?" The question hung in the air. The older man recognized it for what it was, a challenge designed to make him feel small. "As I mentioned," he said with measured patience, "I have extensive experience in both education and technology. I've developed training programs for several major companies. I've mentored countless young professionals who now work in leadership positions across the industry." Brett sat on the edge of the table, swinging one leg casually. That all sounds very impressive, he said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe a word of it. But you have to understand, we get a lot of people coming in here with big claims. Everyone says they're an expert these days. I'm not claiming to be an expert, the man replied. I'm simply stating my qualifications and experience. Amanda walked back toward the table, her heels clicking with each step. Here's what I don't understand, she said, stopping to lean against a chair. If you really have all this amazing experience at places like MIT, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be retired by now? Living off your pension somewhere warm? The words stung more than she probably realized. The man had indeed retired from full-time teaching, but he stayed active through consulting work because he loved helping people develop their potential. Age had not diminished his passion for education and mentorship. I choose to stay active in my field, he answered simply. I believe I still have valuable knowledge to share. Brett laughed again, louder this time. Valuable knowledge, he repeated. Look, I mean no disrespect, but the tech world moves fast, really fast. What you knew 30 years ago or even 5 years ago, that's ancient history now. Things change every month in this industry. The older man felt his jaw tighten slightly. These two young people, probably not even born when he started his career, were lecturing him about the industry he helped shape. He had taught students who went on to create revolutionary technologies. He had published papers that were still cited in current research. But he said none of this. Defending himself would only make them mock him more. Amanda pulled out a chair and sat down, crossing her legs. She studied him like he was an interesting specimen in a laboratory. Let me ask you something else, she said. Do you even know what kind of work we do here? What our main products are? I researched your company thoroughly before coming here, he replied. You specialize in artificial intelligence solutions for business applications. Your main products include automated customer service systems and data analysis tools. You've been in business for 8 years and have grown significantly in the past 3 years. For a moment, both recruiters looked slightly impressed, but they quickly recovered. Brett stood up and walked around the table. Okay, so you can read our website, he said. That doesn't mean you understand the actual technology behind what we do. Can you code? Do you know Python, Java, machine learning algorithms? The older man remained quiet for a moment. The truth was he did know these things. He had taught programming for years and had kept himself updated on new developments. But he sensed that no matter what he said, these two had already made up their minds about him. I have a foundational understanding of programming languages, he said carefully. But the consultation I was invited for focuses on mentorship program development, not technical coding. Amanda leaned back in her chair, a smug expression on her face. A foundational understanding, she said slowly, as if tasting the words. That's a nice way of saying you don't really know much about it. Brett returned to his spot at the head of the table. He picked up a pen and started twirling it between his fingers. Here's the real question, he said, looking directly at the older man. Do you have proper documentation? The words felt like a slap. The older man stared at Brett, understanding the implication behind the question. Documentation, he repeated slowly. You know, Brett continued, his voice casual but his meaning clear. Proof that you're legally allowed to work in this country. ID, work permits, that kind of thing. The conference room suddenly felt colder. The older man had been born in this country. He had served in the military. He had paid taxes for decades. He had educated thousands of students. And now, because of how he looked, he was being asked to prove he belonged here. I'm an American citizen, he said quietly, his voice steady despite the anger building inside him. I was born in Detroit. I've lived in this country my entire life. Amanda and Brett exchanged another look, this one longer than before. Amanda's expression showed something that might have been shame for just a second, but it quickly disappeared. Of course, she said quickly, we have to ask everyone. It's standard procedure. This was another lie. The older man knew that if he had walked in with different skin color, that question would never have been asked. But he also knew that pointing this out would accomplish nothing except making them defensive. I understand, he said. though his tone suggested he understood far more than just their words. Brett stood up and stretched, as if he was getting bored with the whole conversation. "Look," he said, checking his expensive watch. "We have a busy day ahead of us. Real appointments with qualified candidates. I think it's best if you just head out. Maybe contact HR directly and try to sort out whatever confusion happened with your supposed invitation." The older man looked from Brett to Amanda. He saw their young faces, full of confidence and privilege. They had probably never been questioned about whether they belonged somewhere. They had never had to prove their worth before being given a chance. They had been handed opportunities and believed they earned everything through their own merit alone. He thought about arguing further. He thought about demanding to speak to someone higher up. He thought about showing them the email on his phone, making them call Patricia Chen, forcing them to acknowledge their mistake. But he also felt tired of this kind of treatment, tired of having to prove himself over and over again throughout his life. The older man reached for his briefcase. His hand rested on the worn leather handle, feeling the familiar texture beneath his fingers. He had carried this briefcase for 20 years. It had been with him through countless lectures, conferences, and meetings. It had been a gift from his wife when he got his first professorship. "I would like to speak with someone in charge," he said, his voice calm but firm. He stood up straight, his full height making him taller than Brett. "There has clearly been a misunderstanding, and I believe a manager or supervisor should be involved in resolving it." Amanda let out a small laugh, the kind that showed she found his request amusing. She stood up from her chair and walked to the door, leaning against it with her arms crossed. "Someone in charge?" she repeated. "We are in charge. Brett and I are senior recruiters here. We handle all initial meetings and consultations." Brett nodded in agreement. He put the pen down on the table and stood with his hands in his pockets, trying to look relaxed and in control. "That's right," he added. "And part of our job is to make sure that people who come into this building actually belong here. It's about security and maintaining our company's reputation." The older man took a deep breath through his nose. He could feel his heart beating a little faster, not from fear, but from the frustration of dealing with such blatant disrespect. "I was invited here by your Human Resources Department," he said again, speaking slowly and clearly.
"I have the email."
"I confirmed the appointment. Someone made arrangements for me to be here at this exact time." Sure, Brett said, waving his hand in the air like he was swatting away an annoying fly. "But like Amanda said, Patricia is on vacation. And honestly, even if there was some kind of appointment made, we can't just let anyone meet with our executives. There are procedures, background checks, verification processes. I've already been through those processes," the older man insisted. He felt his patience wearing thin, like a rope being pulled tighter and tighter. "I submitted my information 3 weeks ago. Someone from your company called me to confirm everything. I spoke with a woman named Jennifer for 15 minutes about the program details." Amanda pulled out her phone again. This time she actually seemed to be looking at something real on her screen, not just pretending. She scrolled for a moment, her face showing concentration. Then she shrugged. "I don't see any record of that conversation," she said. "And I have access to all our scheduling systems." The older man wondered if she was telling the truth or just making things up. It was impossible to know. He thought about all the students he had taught over the years. Some of them had been challenging, difficult, even disrespectful at times. But he had always found a way to reach them, to help them see beyond their own limited perspectives. These two young people in front of him seemed unreachable, locked inside their own assumptions and prejudices. "Perhaps we could call the main office," he suggested, keeping his voice level. "There must be someone who can verify my appointment." Brett picked up his own phone from the table. He held it in his hand but didn't dial anything. "I could do that," he said slowly. "But honestly, I don't want to waste anyone else's time with this situation. You say you have this email. Show it to the receptionist on your way out. Maybe she can help you figure out what happened." It was a dismissal, clear and final. The older man recognized it for what it was. They wanted him to leave, and they weren't going to help him. He could stand there and argue all day, but it would accomplish nothing except drain his energy and dignity. "This company has standards," Amanda said, echoing something Brett had said earlier. She stood up straighter, as if she was proud of this statement. "We can't compromise those standards. We have to be selective about who we work with. I'm sure you understand." The words hung in the air, filled with hidden meanings. The older man understood perfectly. He had heard similar words before, many times throughout his life. Different eras, different situations, but always the same underlying message. Some people looked at him and saw only his skin color, not his mind, not his achievements, not his character. He felt something shift inside him. Not anger exactly, though that was there too. It was more like a deep sadness mixed with determination. He had fought too hard in his life to let these two young people make him feel less than he was. He had earned every degree, every position, every success through hard work and dedication. He had faced discrimination before and overcome it. He would overcome this too. "I know the CEO personally," he said quietly, the words coming out before he had fully decided to say them. The effect was immediate. Brett's mouth fell open slightly before he caught himself and closed it. Amanda's eyes widened. For just a moment, they both looked uncertain, like they weren't sure if he was serious or not. Then Brett started laughing. It began as a small chuckle but grew into a full laugh that filled the conference room. He put his hand on the table to steady himself. "Oh man," he said between laughs. "That's perfect." "That's absolutely perfect," Amanda joined in, though her laughter sounded a bit more nervous. "You know the CEO?" she said, her voice going up at the end like she was asking a question. "Right, of course you do." "Let me guess," Brett said, still grinning widely. "You guys are old friends? Maybe you taught him in college? Or wait, let me think of something better. You're actually his long-lost uncle." The older man didn't smile. He just stood there looking at them both with steady eyes. "I taught him at MIT, he said simply. "He was one of my students 15 years ago." This made them laugh even harder. Brett leaned back against the wall, shaking his head. "Man, that's the oldest trick in the book," he said. "I've heard every version of that story. People love to claim they know someone important when they're trying to get somewhere they don't belong. It's kind of sad, actually," Amanda added, though she was still smiling. "Like, do you really think we're going to believe that? Our CEO is 34 years old. He's a genius who built this company from nothing. He went to MIT, yes, but I seriously doubt he's going to walk in here and remember some random professor from 15 years ago." The older man picked up his briefcase. He had tried to be patient. He had tried to be understanding. He had maintained his dignity in the face of their disrespect. But now he was done. "I believe I'll wait to speak with him directly," he said. Brett pushed himself off the wall and walked toward the older man, not threatening, but definitely invading his personal space. "Look, buddy," he said, his voice getting harder. "I've been pretty nice about this whole situation. But you need to understand something. This company has worked hard to build its reputation. We can't have random people walking around claiming they know the CEO. It makes us look bad. It makes us look like we don't have proper security." "I'm not a random person," the man replied, his voice getting a little louder despite his efforts to stay calm. "I am exactly who I say I am. I have an appointment. I was invited here. And yes, I do know your CEO. Whether you believe that or not doesn't change the facts." Amanda stepped forward, positioning herself between the older man and the door. "Here's what's going to happen," she said, her voice taking on an official tone. "You're going to leave this conference room. You're going to walk out of this building. And if you really do have some kind of legitimate business here, which I doubt, you're going to go through the proper channels. You're going to call HR. You're going to send emails. You're going to wait for proper authorization." "I already have proper authorization," he said, his voice rising slightly in frustration. "That's what I've been trying to tell you." Brett pulled out his own phone and started tapping on the screen. "You know what?" he said. "I'm going to call security. This has gone on long enough. We've been more than patient with you, but you're refusing to leave. That's trespassing." The older man felt his chest tighten. In all his years, he had never been threatened with security, never been treated like a criminal. He was a respected educator, a published author, a man who had contributed significantly to his field. And now he was being told he was trespassing in a building where he had been explicitly invited to consult. "That won't be necessary," he said quietly. He moved toward the door and Amanda stepped aside to let him pass. He had his hand on the door handle when he stopped and turned back to look at them both. "You should know that your behavior today has been unprofessional, disrespectful, and quite possibly discriminatory. Whatever happens next, you should think carefully about how you treat people." Brett rolled his eyes. "Oh, here we go," he said to Amanda. "Now we're discriminating. Classic move. The older man's hand was still on the door handle. He was about to turn it and leave with whatever dignity he had left, when the door suddenly pushed open from the other side. He stepped back quickly to avoid being hit. A young man entered the conference room. He wore dark jeans and a casual button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. His hair was slightly messy, like he had been running his hands through it. He carried a tablet in one hand and had wireless earbuds in his ears. He was talking to someone on the phone, his voice animated and focused. No, tell them we need the numbers by Thursday, not Friday, he was saying into his phone. Thursday morning at the latest. We can't push the investor meeting back again. Amanda and Brett immediately stood up straighter. Their faces changed completely, the smugness disappearing and being replaced by professional smiles. Amanda smoothed down her suit jacket. Brett put his phone in his pocket quickly. The young man with the tablet looked up from his screen, still half listening to whoever was on his phone. His eyes swept across the room, taking in the scene. Amanda standing by the door, Brett near the table, and the older man with his briefcase clearly about to leave. The young man's eyes stopped on the older man's face. His expression shifted from distraction to confusion. He pulled one earbud out. I'll call you back, he said into his phone, ending the call without waiting for a response. He pulled out the other earbud and just stood there staring. The older man looked back at him. There was something familiar about this young man's face, but it took him a moment to place it. 15 years was a long time. People changed. They grew up. They became different versions of themselves. The young man's mouth opened slightly. His eyes grew wider. The tablet in his hand tilted down, forgotten. Professor? He said, his voice barely above a whisper. The older man felt something click in his memory. That voice even deeper now than it had been years ago. That way of standing with one foot slightly forward. The intense focus in those eyes. Daniel? He said, using the name that suddenly came back to him. The young man, Daniel, took 2 quick steps forward. Then he started moving faster, crossing the conference room in seconds. Professor, he said again, louder this time, his face breaking into a huge smile. Professor, oh my God, what are you doing here? Before the older man could answer, Daniel wrapped him in a tight hug. The tablet clattered onto the table. The older man stood still for just a second, surprised, then he hugged back. He could feel the younger man's shoulders shaking slightly, like he was overwhelmed with emotion. Behind them, Amanda and Brett stood frozen. Their faces had gone pale. Amanda's mouth hung open. Brett looked like he had been turned to stone. Daniel pulled back from the hug, keeping his hands on the older man's shoulders. His eyes were bright, and there might have been tears in them. I can't believe you're here, he said, shaking his head. Nobody told me you were coming. Why didn't anyone tell me? The older man found himself smiling despite everything that had just happened. I was invited to consult on a mentorship program, he explained. I received an email from your HR department. The appointment was scheduled for 10 o'clock. Daniel's eyebrows came together in confusion. A mentorship program? That's amazing. That's perfect. But why didn't anyone inform me? He looked around the room, noticing Amanda and Brett for the first time since he had recognized his former professor. What's going on here? Why is Professor... He said the older man's full name, speaking it with respect and warmth. Why is he in a conference room with you two? Where's the program director? Where's the HR team? Amanda opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked at Brett, her eyes wide with panic. Brett's face had turned red and he was staring at the floor. The older man watched the realization dawn on Daniel's face. The young CEO looked from his former professor to the 2 recruiters, then back again. His smile faded. His eyes narrowed. What happened here? He asked, his voice changing from warm to serious. Daniel, the older man started, using his first name the way he used to when Daniel was his student. It's all right. There was just some confusion about my appointment, but Daniel was already reading the room. He had always been perceptive, even as a young student. That's one of the reasons the older man had seen so much potential in him. Daniel noticed his professor's tight jaw. He saw the tension in the older man's shoulders. He observed how Amanda and Brett were avoiding eye contact. What kind of confusion? Daniel asked, his voice getting quieter but somehow more intense. Nobody spoke. The silence in the conference room felt heavy and uncomfortable. Through the glass wall, people walking by in the hallway started to notice something was happening. A few stopped to look in, curious about why the CEO was in conference room 3. Daniel turned to face Amanda and Brett directly. "I asked a question," he said. "What happened in this room before I arrived?" Brett cleared his throat. He tried to smile, but it came out looking more like a grimace. "Sir, there was just a small misunderstanding about scheduling. We didn't realize that your guest had an appointment." "You thought what?" Daniel interrupted, his voice sharp. Amanda jumped in, talking quickly. "We were just doing our jobs, making sure that only authorized people were in the building. Security is important, and we didn't have any record of his appointment in the system. So naturally, we had to verify." "Verify what exactly?" Daniel asked. He crossed his arms over his chest. The older man recognized that posture. Daniel used to stand like that in class when someone was trying to avoid answering a question directly. The older man put his hand gently on Daniel's arm. "Daniel, please. I appreciate your concern, but there's no need to make this into a bigger situation than it needs to be." I was just about to leave. Daniel looked at his former professor, really looked at him. He saw the dignified way the older man held himself despite whatever had happened. He saw the wisdom in those eyes that had taught him so much years ago. But he also saw something else. A tiredness, a sadness, the look of someone who had dealt with this kind of thing before. "Professor?" Daniel said softly. "Please tell me exactly what happened." From the beginning, the older man hesitated. He had spent most of his life trying not to make trouble, trying to rise above prejudice and discrimination with grace and dignity. But he also believed in truth, and Daniel deserved to know the truth. "I arrived at 10 o'clock as scheduled," he began, his voice calm and factual. "I was directed to this conference room. These two individuals entered and immediately assumed I was here for a different position than the one I was actually invited for. When I explained about the mentorship consultation, they didn't believe me. 'What position did they think you were here for?' Daniel asked, though something in his face suggested he already knew the answer. The older man paused. "They suggested I go to the maintenance office." Daniel's jaw clenched. His hands crossed over his chest, tightened into fists. "I see," he said quietly. "What else?" "They questioned my qualifications. They questioned whether I had proper documentation to work in this country. They suggested I was lying about my credentials. And when I mentioned that I knew you, that I had been your professor, they laughed and accused me of making up stories." With each sentence, Daniel's expression grew darker. Amanda had started shaking her head, as if she wanted to deny everything but couldn't find the words. Brett had gone from red to pale, all the color draining from his face. Daniel uncrossed his arms and walked to the window. He stood there for a moment, looking out at the city, his back to everyone in the room. The older man could see his shoulders rise and fall as he took deep breaths, clearly trying to control his emotions. When Daniel turned around, his face was a mask of barely contained anger. "Do you two understand who this man is?" he asked Amanda and Brett. His voice was quiet, which somehow made it more frightening than if he had yelled. They both shook their heads slightly, not trusting themselves to speak. "This man," Daniel said, gesturing toward his former professor, "is one of the most brilliant educators I have ever known. When I was 20 years old, sitting in his classroom at MIT, struggling with whether I was smart enough or brave enough to pursue my ideas, he was the one who believed in me." Daniel walked back toward the center of the room, his eyes never leaving the two recruiters. "When everyone else said I was too young to start a company, that I should get more experience first, work for someone else, play it safe, he told me to take the risk. He encouraged me to trust myself." Amanda's eyes were starting to fill with tears. Brett looked like he might be sick. "And when I did start this company," Daniel continued, his voice getting stronger, "when I was working out of a tiny apartment with no money and no investors, do you know who gave me my first investment? Not a venture capital firm, not some wealthy entrepreneur. This man right here, my professor, he gave me $50,000 of his own money. Money he had saved, money he and his wife had put aside for their retirement." The older man felt his throat tighten as Daniel spoke. He had never wanted recognition for the investment he had made. It hadn't been about money. It had been about believing in a brilliant young mind and giving him the chance to succeed. Daniel's voice grew even more passionate as he continued. "That investment became worth millions when this company took off. And do you know what he did? He donated most of it to scholarship funds. He used the money to help other young people get their education. He could have kept it all, Could have retired wealthy, but instead he gave it away because he cared more about helping others than enriching himself. Brett had his hand over his mouth. His eyes were wide with horror as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. Amanda had tears running down her cheeks now, her carefully applied makeup starting to smudge. "This man taught me everything I know about leadership," Daniel said, his voice shaking slightly with emotion. "Not just technical skills, but how to think critically, how to solve complex problems, how to treat people with respect and dignity. He taught me that intelligence isn't about showing off how smart you are. It's about lifting others up, sharing knowledge, creating opportunities." The older man stepped forward. "Daniel," he said gently. "They didn't know." "It's all right." Daniel spun around to face his former professor. "No, Professor, it's not all right. It's not all right at all." He took a breath, seeming to struggle with his emotions. "You taught me to stand up for what's right. You taught me that silence in the face of injustice is the same as acceptance. I won't be silent about this." He turned back to Amanda and Brett. Both of them looked like they wished they could disappear into the floor.
Do you understand now?
Daniel asked them. "Do you understand that this man is the reason any of you have jobs? This company exists because of his faith in me, his investment, his mentorship. Every salary you've ever received from this company, every benefit, every opportunity, it all traces back to him." Amanda wiped at her eyes with her hand. "Sir, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't know. We made a terrible mistake. I was completely unprofessional." "I'm so sorry," Brett nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. We apologize. We made assumptions we shouldn't have made. We treated him disrespectfully. There's no excuse for our behavior." Daniel listened to their apologies, but his expression didn't soften. "You're right," he said coldly. "There is no excuse. And your apologies, while noted, don't change what happened here. You saw my professor, a man with decades of experience and wisdom, and you immediately decided he didn't belong here. Why?" The question hung in the air. Nobody wanted to answer it because everyone knew the answer. The older man knew it too. He had known it from the moment Amanda suggested he go to the maintenance office. "We thought—" Amanda started, then stopped. She knew that finishing that sentence would only make things worse. "You thought what?" Daniel pressed. "That someone who looks like him couldn't possibly be a professional consultant? That his age or his appearance meant he wasn't qualified? That his slightly outdated suit gave you permission to treat him like he was beneath you?" More people had gathered outside the glass wall of the conference room. Employees stood in the hallway watching the scene unfold. Word was spreading through the office that something serious was happening in conference room 3. "You asked him for documentation," Daniel said, and his voice had gone very quiet again. "You asked an American citizen, a military veteran, a respected professor if he had proper papers to work in this country. Do you understand how offensive that is? Do you understand what that implies?" Brett opened his mouth to respond, but Daniel held up his hand. Don't try to explain it away. Don't tell me it was standard procedure, because we both know you've never asked that question of anyone who looks like me or you." The older man walked over to where Daniel stood. He placed his hand on the young man's shoulder, the same way he used to do when Daniel was his student and would get frustrated with a difficult problem. "Daniel," he said softly, "I understand you're angry. I appreciate you defending me. But please remember what I taught you about handling difficult situations." Daniel looked at his former professor. Some of the anger in his face softened, replaced by sadness and disappointment. "You taught me to respond with wisdom, not just emotion," he said. "To be firm but fair." "That's right," the older man confirmed. "So let's handle this the right way." Daniel nodded slowly. He took another deep breath and seemed to regain some of his composure. But when he looked back at Amanda and Brett, his face was still serious and determined. "You're both terminated," he said simply. "Effective immediately." Amanda let out a small gasp. Brett's face went even paler. "Sir, please," Amanda said, stepping forward. "We made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But we can learn from this. We can do better. Please give us another chance." Daniel shook his head. "A chance is what you give someone who makes an honest error in judgment. What you did today wasn't an honest error. You saw someone who looked different from what you expected, and you treated him with disrespect and suspicion. You mocked him. You questioned his integrity. You tried to make him feel small. We didn't mean—" Brett started. "Yes, you did," Daniel interrupted. "You meant every word, every look, every dismissive gesture. That's what makes this so serious. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a communication problem. This was prejudice, and I will not have people working in my company who treat others that way. The older man felt conflicted. Part of him felt vindicated, seeing Daniel stand up for him so firmly. But another part of him, the part that had spent a lifetime teaching and trying to help people grow, wondered if there might be another way. "Daniel," he said, "may I speak with you privately for a moment?" Daniel looked at him surprised. "Of course, Professor, always." He gestured toward the door. "Amanda, Brett, wait here. Don't leave this room." They both nodded miserably. The older man followed Daniel out into the hallway. The employees who had been watching quickly scattered, pretending they had business elsewhere. Daniel led his former professor to a small office nearby and closed the door behind them. "Professor, I know what you're going to say," Daniel began, but the older man held up his hand. "Let me speak first," he said gently. "You've defended me beautifully today. You've shown exactly the kind of character and integrity I always knew you had. But I need you to think carefully about what happens next." Daniel leaned against the desk, crossing his arms again. "They disrespected you, Professor. They treated you like you were nothing. They deserve to lose their jobs." "Perhaps," the older man agreed. "But will firing them accomplish what you really want? Will it make them understand what they did wrong, or will it just make them angry and defensive? Will it help them become better people? Or will it simply confirm their existing biases?" Daniel frowned, considering this. "What are you suggesting?" The older man walked to the window. Outside, he could see the city stretching out in all directions. So many people, so many stories, so much potential for both good and bad. "I'm suggesting that this moment could be about more than punishment. It could be about education, about transformation." "They don't deserve your forgiveness," Daniel said, his voice tight. "It's not about what they deserve," the older man replied, turning back to face him. "It's about what serves the greater good. Those two young people out there made terrible choices today, but they're young. They can learn. They can change. The question is, do we give them that opportunity, or do we just remove them and let them go become someone else's problem?" Daniel ran his hand through his hair, looking frustrated. "I don't know if I can just let this go, Professor. Every time I think about what they said to you, what they implied, I get angry all over again." "I'm not asking you to let it go," the older man said. "I'm asking you to channel that anger into something constructive. Use this as a teaching moment, not just a punishing moment. Make them understand not just that what they did was wrong, but why it was wrong." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, thinking. The older man could see the struggle on his face. The young CEO wanted justice, wanted to protect his mentor, wanted to send a clear message about what his company stood for, but he also trusted his professor's wisdom. "What would you have me do?" Daniel finally asked. The older man smiled slightly. "I think you already know. You learned it in my classroom all those years ago. When someone makes a mistake, you don't just punish them. You help them understand the impact of their actions. You give them the tools to do better. And then you give them the choice of whether to use those tools or not." Daniel and his former professor walked back to conference room 3. Through the glass wall, they could see Amanda and Brett still waiting inside. Both of them sat in chairs now, looking small and scared. Amanda had her head in her hands. Brett stared at the table in front of him. When Daniel opened the door, both recruiters stood up immediately. Their faces showed a mixture of hope and fear. The older man entered behind Daniel and closed the door quietly. Daniel didn't sit down. He stood at the head of the table, his posture straight and formal. "I've spoken with my professor," he began, "and he has given me something to think about. Something I should have remembered from my own time in his classroom." Amanda and Brett glanced at each other, uncertain what this meant. The older man moved to stand by the window, giving Daniel space to handle this his own way. "My initial reaction was to terminate you both immediately," Daniel continued, "and honestly, that's still what my gut tells me to do. What you did today was offensive, discriminatory, and completely contrary to everything this company stands for. It made me ashamed that people who work for me could behave that way." Brett swallowed hard. Amanda's eyes filled with tears again. "Sir, we understand," she said softly. "We know we failed. We know we don't deserve your mercy." Daniel held up his hand. "Let me finish. What my professor reminded me is that leadership isn't just about punishment. It's about education. It's about giving people the opportunity to grow and change, even when they've done something terrible. Especially then, actually." He paused, gathering his thoughts. The older man watched from the window, proud of how Daniel was handling this difficult situation. So here's what's going to happen, Daniel said. You're not fired, not yet, but you're both suspended without pay for 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, you're going to do some serious reflection on what happened here today and why it happened. Amanda let out a breath she seemed to have been holding. Brett's shoulders relaxed slightly, but both of them still looked nervous about what might come next. When you come back, Daniel continued, you're going to participate in a comprehensive training program on unconscious bias, diversity, and respectful workplace conduct. Not just a quick video or a half-day seminar, a real intensive program, and you're going to help develop training materials that will be used throughout the company. We will, Amanda said quickly. Thank you, sir. We'll do whatever it takes. Daniel's expression remained serious. I'm not finished. You're also both being demoted. You'll no longer be senior recruiters. You'll be moved to entry-level positions in different departments where you can learn this company from the ground up again. Your pay will be adjusted accordingly. Brett nodded, accepting this. That's more than fair, sir. And finally, Daniel said, his voice becoming even more firm, you're going to write detailed, sincere apologies to my professor. Not just I'm sorry, but real letters explaining what you did, why it was wrong, and what you've learned. He doesn't have to accept your apologies. That's his choice. But you will write them. Of course, Amanda said. Absolutely. Daniel walked closer to where they stood. I want to be very clear about something. This is not forgiveness. This is not me saying what you did is okay. This is a final chance, and it comes with conditions. If either of you ever, and I mean ever, treats another person with that kind of disrespect again, you're gone. No discussion, no second thoughts, just gone. Do you understand? Yes, sir, they both said together. Furthermore, Daniel added, your actions today will be documented in your permanent employment records. Any future performance reviews will take this incident into account. And if you decide to leave this company at any point, and someone calls for a reference, this is something that will be mentioned. You don't get to pretend this didn't happen. The weight of his words settled over the room. Amanda wiped at her eyes again. Brett nodded slowly, understanding the full scope of what Daniel was saying. Daniel turned to look at his former professor. Professor, do you have anything you'd like to add? The older man stepped forward from his place by the window. He looked at Amanda and Brett, studying their faces. He saw genuine remorse there, or at least what looked like it. Time would tell if it was real or just regret at getting caught. I want you both to understand something, he said, his voice calm but carrying authority. What happened today didn't just hurt me. It damaged you as well. When you treat another person as less than yourself, when you make assumptions based on appearance or prejudice, you diminish your own humanity. You make yourself smaller. Amanda and Brett listened, not daring to interrupt. I've faced discrimination many times in my life, the older man continued. I wish I could say today was unusual, but it wasn't. What is unusual is being given this opportunity to address it directly, to speak truth to power, as they say. Most times people like me just have to swallow the insult and move on. He walked slowly around the table, his hands clasped behind his back. It was a posture he often took when lecturing, and it came naturally to him now. You both are young, he said. You have your whole careers ahead of you. You can choose what kind of professionals you want to be. You can choose what kind of people you want to be. Today you made poor choices, but choices can be changed. Behavior can be modified. Hearts can be opened. Brett looked up at him. Professor, I just want you to know that I'm truly sorry. I was taught better than this. My parents would be horrified if they knew what I did today. I have no excuse except that I let my assumptions and my ego get in the way of my better judgment. The older man nodded, acknowledging this. Then let today be the day you start living up to what your parents taught you. Amanda spoke next, her voice shaky. I've never thought of myself as a prejudiced person. I've always believed I treat everyone equally. But today showed me that's not true. I have biases I didn't even know were there. And I'm scared because if I could do this once, what else am I doing wrong without realizing it? That fear is actually a good sign, the older man said. It means you're beginning to understand the depth of the problem. Unconscious bias is called unconscious because we don't see it in ourselves. It takes work to recognize it, even more work to change it. But that work is necessary. Daniel had been watching this exchange silently. Now he spoke again. You should also know that this incident is going to lead to company-wide changes. We're implementing a new training program for all employees. Not just you two. We're reviewing our hiring practices, our policies, our culture. We're bringing in consultants, including my professor here if he's willing, to help us do better." The older man smiled at Daniel. "I'm willing," he said simply. "Good," Daniel replied. He turned back to Amanda and Brett. "You two can leave now. HR will contact you tomorrow with details about your suspension and the training program. Leave your badges and company devices with security on your way out. You'll get new ones when you return." Amanda and Brett gathered their things quickly. As they walked toward the door, Amanda stopped and turned back. "Professor," she said, her voice small, "I know I don't deserve to ask this, but will you be here when we come back?" "Will you be the one doing the training?" The older man considered this. "I'll be involved, yes. Whether I'm the one who trains you directly, I'm not sure yet. But you'll see me around. And when you do, I hope you'll see me differently than you did this morning." "We will," Brett said. "I promise you we will." After they left, Daniel collapsed into a chair, suddenly looking exhausted. He rubbed his face with both hands. "That was harder than I expected," he admitted. The older man sat down across from him. "Leadership usually is. The easy thing would have been to fire them and move on. You chose the harder path. Do you think I made the right choice?" Daniel asked, looking up at his former mentor. "I think you made a choice consistent with your values," the older man replied. "Whether it's the right choice, time will tell. They might learn and grow from this. Or they might just learn to hide their biases better, but at least you gave them the opportunity to choose growth." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "I'm still angry, Professor. Even after all that, I'm still angry about what they did to you." "That's natural," the older man said. "And that anger can be useful if you direct it toward positive change. Use it to fuel the improvements you talked about. Use it to make this company a place where what happened today can never happen again." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Through the glass wall, they could see the office returning to normal. People went back to their desks, their meetings, their daily routines. But something had shifted. Word of what happened would spread. People would talk about it. And maybe, just maybe, it would make them think about their own behaviors and assumptions. "Professor," Daniel said after a while, "I still can't believe you're here. When did Patricia reach out to you about the mentorship program?" The older man pulled out his phone and showed Daniel the email. 3 weeks ago, she explained that you wanted to create a program for young professionals in the company, mentoring them in leadership and professional development. She said you specifically wanted someone with academic and industry experience. Daniel read the email, then looked confused. "I did want to start that program, but I never mentioned your name to Patricia. I was going to reach out to you myself once we had the structure figured out." He looked up. "Did Patricia know about our connection?" "I don't think so," the older man said. "She seemed to be going through a list of potential consultants. My name must have come up through her research." Daniel smiled, a real smile this time. "That's actually perfect. That means she found you based on your reputation and qualifications, not because of your connection to me, which just proves what I've always known. You're brilliant at what you do." The older man felt warmth spread through his chest. Despite everything that had happened that morning, despite the humiliation and disrespect, this moment made it worthwhile. Seeing his former student grown into a principled, successful leader reminded him why he had dedicated his life to education. 3 months had passed since that difficult morning in conference room 3. The city outside looked different now. Winter had given way to early spring. Trees that had been bare were starting to show small green buds. The sun rose earlier and set later. Inside TechVision Industries, changes had taken root as well. The older man stood in a different conference room now. This one was larger, with chairs arranged in a semicircle instead of around a table. 20 new employees sat in those chairs, notebooks in their laps, looking at him with attention and respect. These were the newest members of the company, fresh from their orientation week. "Welcome," he said, his voice warm and carrying easily through the room. "My name is Professor, and I'm here today to talk with you about respect, dignity, and what it means to build an inclusive workplace culture." He had done this presentation 12 times now, once for each department in the company. Every employee, from the newest hire to the most senior executive, had sat through his training. But he never used the same exact words twice. He tailored each session to the specific group, making it relevant to their roles and experiences. "I want to start by telling you a story," he continued. "It's a true story that happened in this very building, in a smaller conference room down the hall. The new employees leaned forward slightly, curious. Some of them had probably heard rumors about what happened. Office gossip had a way of spreading. But the professor wanted them to hear it from him directly. He told them about his arrival that morning, about the invitation that brought him here, about the two recruiters who made assumptions based on his appearance. He didn't share the names of Amanda and Brett. That wasn't the point. The point was the lesson. As he spoke, he watched the reactions on the faces before him. Some people looked shocked. Others nodded knowingly, as if they had experienced similar situations. A few looked uncomfortable, perhaps recognizing themselves in parts of the story. "The reason I tell you this," he said after finishing the account, "is not to make you feel guilty or ashamed. It's to help you understand that bias lives in all of us. It's not about being a bad person. It's about recognizing the unconscious patterns in our thinking and making conscious choices to do better." A young woman in the front row raised her hand. "Professor, how do we recognize our own biases if they're unconscious?" He smiled at the question. "That's the challenge, isn't it? And it's why this training exists. We learn to recognize bias by paying attention to our initial reactions to people, by questioning our assumptions, by seeking out perspectives different from our own, by being willing to be uncomfortable and to admit when we're wrong." For the next 2 hours, he led them through exercises and discussions. He broke them into small groups to talk about times they had witnessed or experienced discrimination. He gave them scenarios to analyze and problem solve. He answered their questions honestly, drawing from his decades of experience. At the end of the session, a young man approached him. "Professor, thank you for sharing your story with us. It must have been difficult to relive that experience." "It was," the older man admitted. "But if my difficult experience can help prevent someone else from experiencing the same thing, then it's worth the discomfort of talking about it." After the young employees filed out, Daniel entered the room. He came to these sessions when his schedule allowed, always sitting in the back, always listening carefully to what his former professor taught. "Another great session," Daniel said, walking up to shake his hand. "I learn something new every time." "You're a good student," the professor replied. "You always were." They walked together to Daniel's office. Along the way, employees greeted them both warmly. The older man had become a familiar presence in the building. People knew who he was now. They knew his story. And they treated him with the respect he had always deserved. In Daniel's office, they sat down with coffee. The walls were covered with awards, photos, and prominently displayed in a frame, a certificate from one of the professor's classes at MIT. Daniel had earned an A in that class. But more importantly, he had learned how to think. "I wanted to update you on Amanda and Brett," Daniel said, setting down his coffee cup. The professor nodded, listening. He had thought about those two young people often over the past months. He wondered if they had truly learned from what happened or if they were just going through the motions. "They came back after their suspension," Daniel explained. "They've both been working in entry-level positions, as I said they would. Amanda is in customer service now. Brett is in data entry. And Professor, I have to say, they've both shown real effort to change." "Tell me more," the professor encouraged. Daniel pulled up something on his computer and turned the screen so they could both see it. "Amanda wrote this blog post for our internal company newsletter. She wrote about her experience, about confronting her own bias, about the work she's doing to be better. She's been leading some of the employee resource group meetings for diversity and inclusion." The professor read the blog post. It was honest and thoughtful. Amanda didn't make excuses for herself. She took full responsibility for her actions and talked openly about how painful it was to realize she had hurt someone so badly. "And Brett?" the professor asked. "Brett has been quieter about it," Daniel said. "He's not much of a writer, but he's been attending every optional training session we offer. He volunteers to help with recruiting events now, specifically at historically black colleges and universities. He told me he wants to help fix the problem he was part of creating." The professor felt something warm in his chest. Hope, perhaps, or satisfaction that his choice to push for education over punishment had been the right one. "They both asked if they could meet with you," Daniel added, "to deliver their apology letters in person. I told them I would ask you first. You're under no obligation to meet with them if you don't want to." The professor thought about this. The letters had arrived several weeks ago, delivered through Daniel. He had read them carefully. Both Amanda and Brett had written multiple pages. detailing not just their apologies but their understanding of what they had done wrong and their commitments to change. "I'll meet with them," he decided. "Together, I think. In one of those small conference rooms." Daniel looked surprised. "Are you sure? After what they put you through?" "I'm sure," the professor confirmed. "Part of growth is facing the people you've hurt. And part of healing is accepting sincere apologies. I believe theirs are sincere." The meeting was arranged for the following week. When the professor arrived at the conference room, Amanda and Brett were already there, waiting. They both looked nervous. Amanda's hands were clasped tightly in her lap. Brett kept adjusting his tie even though it was already straight. The professor entered and closed the door behind him. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Amanda stood up. "Professor, thank you for agreeing to meet with us. We know you didn't have to do this." Brett stood as well. "We wanted to apologize to you in person. The letters were important, but this felt more meaningful." The professor gestured for them to sit, and he sat down across from them. "I read your letters," he said. "Several times, actually. They were well written and thoughtful. But I want to hear from you now in your own words what you've learned over these past months." Amanda spoke first. Her voice was steady but emotional. "I learned that I was carrying prejudices I didn't even know I had. I grew up thinking I was open-minded and fair. But that morning with you, I discovered I wasn't. I made assumptions based on your appearance, your age, your race, and those assumptions made me cruel." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Since then, I've been reading books about unconscious bias. I've been listening to podcasts. I've been having uncomfortable conversations with people whose experiences are different from mine. And most importantly, I've been paying attention to my own thoughts and reactions. When I meet someone new now, I catch myself making quick judgments and I stop and question them." Brett nodded along with what Amanda was saying. When she finished, he added his own thoughts. "For me, it was about entitlement. I had this attitude that I belonged in that conference room and you didn't. I never questioned why I felt that way. I just accepted it as truth. Now I understand that attitude was built on years of being given opportunities I didn't earn, being trusted in situations where others weren't, being given the benefit of the doubt." He looked directly at the professor. "You came in with an invitation, with credentials, with decades of experience. But I didn't see any of that. I only saw what I expected to see based on my prejudices. And I'm deeply sorry for that." The professor listened to them both speak. He heard the sincerity in their voices. He saw the changes in how they carried themselves. They were not the same arrogant young people who had mocked him 3 months ago. "I accept your apologies," he said simply. Relief washed over both their faces. Amanda's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were different tears than the ones she had cried that morning in conference room 3. These were tears of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "But accepting your apologies doesn't mean forgetting what happened," the professor continued. "It means I choose not to carry anger toward you. It means I believe in your capacity to grow and change. It means I'm willing to see who you're becoming rather than only who you were." "We understand," Brett said. "And we promise we'll keep working on ourselves. This isn't just something we did to keep our jobs. This is about being better people." The professor stood up and they did as well. He extended his hand first to Amanda, then to Brett. They shook hands, and in that gesture was an acknowledgement of the past and a commitment to a different future. After they left, the professor stayed in the conference room for a few minutes. He thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment, the discrimination he had faced throughout his life, the students he had taught and inspired, the investment he had made in Daniel that had changed both their lives. And finally, this morning 3 months ago that could have ended in bitterness but instead became an opportunity for transformation. His phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. "Company-wide meeting in the main auditorium in 30 minutes. Can you come? I'm announcing something important." The professor made his way to the auditorium. Employees filled the seats, chatting with each other while they waited. He found a seat near the back, content to observe. Daniel walked onto the stage and the room quieted down. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "I have a few announcements today, but first I want to talk about where we've been as a company over the past few months." He spoke about the changes they had implemented, the diversity training that was now mandatory for all employees, and part of the onboarding for new hires. The revised hiring practices that removed identifying information from initial resume reviews to reduce bias. The employee resource groups that had been formed to support underrepresented communities within the company. These changes didn't happen because I woke up one day and decided to implement them, Daniel said honestly. They happened because we had a failure in our company culture, a serious failure that could have been ignored or swept under the rug. But instead, we chose to confront it, learn from it, and use it as a catalyst for becoming better. He gestured toward where the professor sat. And we had guidance from someone who has dedicated his life to education and mentorship. Professor, would you please stand? The older man was surprised, but rose to his feet. The entire auditorium turned to look at him, and then something unexpected happened. People started clapping. It began with a few people and spread until the whole room was applauding. Some people stood up, and soon everyone was standing, giving him an ovation. He felt his throat tighten with emotion. This was so different from that morning 3 months ago when 2 people had tried to make him feel like he didn't belong here. Now, hundreds of people were showing him that he did belong, that his contribution mattered, that his dignity and worth were recognized. When the applause finally died down and everyone sat again, Daniel continued. I'm pleased to announce that the professor has agreed to a long-term consulting position with our company. He'll be continuing to lead our diversity and inclusion initiatives. But more than that, he's going to help us launch the mentorship program that brought him here in the first place. More applause. The professor smiled and gave a small wave before sitting down. Daniel concluded his announcements with one more piece of news. We're also establishing a scholarship fund in the professor's name. Every year, we'll provide full scholarships to 5 students from underrepresented backgrounds who are pursuing degrees in technology fields. These students will also have guaranteed internships here if they want them, and mentorship from our senior staff. The professor felt tears prick at his eyes. This was more than he had ever expected. What had started as a consultation meeting had transformed into something much larger, something meaningful, something that would outlast all of them. After the meeting, employees approached him to shake his hand, to thank him, to share their own stories of overcoming bias or witnessing discrimination. He listened to each one, offering encouragement and wisdom. As the auditorium emptied, Daniel came to find him. So, Professor, what do you think? Are we doing okay? The older man put his arm around his former student's shoulders. You're doing more than okay, Daniel. You're building something special here. Not just a successful company, but a place where people are treated with dignity and respect, where mistakes become learning opportunities, where growth is valued as much as profit. They walked out of the building together into the spring afternoon. The sun was warm on their faces. Cherry blossom trees along the sidewalk had burst into bloom, covering everything in soft pink petals. You know, Daniel said, that morning 3 months ago was one of the worst days of my professional life. Finding out that people in my company had treated you that way, it made me question everything. But look what came from it, the professor pointed out. Sometimes the hardest moments lead to the most important growth. You taught me that, Daniel said, in your classroom all those years ago. You said that failure and difficulty aren't the opposite of success. They're part of the path to success. The professor smiled. I'm glad that lesson stuck with you. They reached the parking area where the professor's car waited. Before getting in, he turned to look back at the building. Through the glass walls, he could see people at their desks in meetings, walking through hallways, all of them part of this company that Daniel had built, that he himself had invested in so many years ago. I'm proud of you, he said to Daniel. Not just for your business success, but for the leader you've become. You could have handled that situation 3 months ago in so many different ways. You chose the path of education and transformation. That takes courage. Daniel smiled. And in that smile, the professor could still see glimpses of the young student he had been 15 years ago. Eager, brilliant, but also uncertain and in need of guidance. Now he was a man who provided guidance to others. I learned from the best, Daniel said simply. As the professor drove away from Tech Vision Industries that afternoon, he thought about the circle of life and learning. He had taught Daniel, who had built a company, who had hired Amanda and Brett, who had made a terrible mistake, who were now learning and growing and would presumably go on to teach others. Each person in that chain had the power to make the world a little better or a little worse. Each interaction mattered. He thought about all the students he had taught over his long career. How many of them remembered his lessons? How many were out there making decisions, leading companies, raising families, influenced by what he had taught them? There was no way to know for certain, but moments like today gave him hope that the ripples spread far and wide. The scholarship program would help 5 students each year. Those students would grow up to help others. Amanda and Brett were learning to recognize and overcome their biases. They would interact with thousands of people throughout their careers, treating them differently because of what they had learned. The hundreds of employees who had gone through the training would carry those lessons with them wherever they went next. One morning of discrimination, as painful as it had become a seed for positive change. Not because the discrimination itself was good, but because people chose to respond to it with wisdom, education, and a commitment to do better. That evening, the professor sat in his home office looking at the framed photos on his wall. His wife smiled at him from one of them. His children and grandchildren filled others. His military service portrait from decades ago. His PhD diploma. A picture of him receiving a teaching award. And now he would add a new photo to this collection. Daniel had given him a framed picture from today's company meeting, showing the professor standing to receive the applause of the employees. He thought about the journey that had brought him from a small town in Detroit to military service to university, to this moment. The discrimination he had faced along the way could have made him bitter. Instead, he had chosen to use it as fuel to work harder, to achieve more, to prove through his actions that the prejudices people held were wrong, and more importantly, he had chosen to dedicate his life to helping others, teaching, mentoring, investing in young minds, opening doors that had been closed to him when he was starting out, making the path easier for those who came after him. That was the real victory. Not the applause, not the scholarship in his name, not even seeing Amanda and Brett learn from their mistakes. The real victory was knowing that his life had made a difference, that he had taken the gifts he had been given, the opportunities he had fought for, and used them to lift others up. The phone rang. It was his daughter calling to check in, as she did every Sunday evening. He told her about his day, about the company meeting, about the scholarship fund. She wasn't surprised. "That's just like you, Dad," she said, her voice warm with love and pride. "Turning something negative into something positive, making the world better in your own quiet way." "Not so quiet today," he joked. "I got a standing ovation," she laughed. "Well, it's about time people recognized what our family has known all along. You're pretty special." After they hung up, the professor sat for a while in the comfortable quiet of his office. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. A new day would come tomorrow, bringing new challenges and new opportunities to make a difference. He thought about the young people he would mentor through the new program at TechVision. He thought about the ongoing training sessions he would lead. He thought about Amanda and Brett and whether they would truly become the change they promised to be. He thought about all the other Amandas and Bretts out there in the world, making assumptions, causing harm, perhaps without even realizing it. And he thought about his role in all of this. Not as a victim of discrimination, though he had been that. Not as a hero, though others might see him that way. But simply as a teacher, someone who had knowledge and experience and wisdom to share, someone who believed that people could learn, could grow, could change. That belief, more than anything else, was what kept him going. After decades of teaching, after facing countless obstacles, after witnessing both the worst and best of human nature, he still believed in the power of education to transform lives and build a better world. As darkness fell outside his window, the professor smiled to himself. Tomorrow he would return to TechVision Industries. He would continue his work. He would teach, mentor, guide, and inspire, and slowly, one person at a time, one lesson at a time, one choice at a time, things would get better. Not perfect. The world would never be perfect. There would always be prejudice to overcome, injustice to fight, ignorance to address, but better. Always moving toward better, and that was enough. That was everything.